So if you have questions, just hang on to them and I'll take them at the end of the presentation. All right, so just a quick fast facts today. The Garden, if you didn't know, it's a pretty young organization, which is relatively unique in terms of botanical gardens. So we're only about 12 years old. All right, so we opened in 2009, end of 2009, then into 2010, they were still opening different parts of the garden. So many other gardens in the United States, they're much older. Some are even hundreds of years old. Right, so to be only 12 years old makes us pretty unique. It gives us some extra opportunities that other older organizations may not have. All right, we're pretty large botanical garden, got 170 acres of land. 90 acres are the natural areas. It's a conservation land that's kind of towards the back of the property. If you've ever been out to the Florida garden, which is kind of the last cultivated garden before you get into the natural areas, you may have seen like the lakes, and you may have seen the birding tower or different animals around there. That's kind of where the natural areas begins. There's a trail out on the lake, if you've ever seen that, which you guys can walk around out to enjoy. So we have about 2 miles of paths. There are paved paths, and then there are some dirt and sand trails out in the natural areas people can walk out through if they want to. All right, we're a private organization and we're a nonprofit. Right, so the garden isn't owned by like a government organization or the city or the county, or it's not a national park. It's a private, and the nonprofit itself owns the land and runs and maintains the garden. We're open daily, 9 to 5. During the summer, we do switch our hours to summer hours, which are 9 to 2. Right, so we close at 2 o'clock. That happens usually early June, and it runs until October, and then we go back to the regular 9 to 5 during the winter days. It's just way too hot in the summer to come past 2 o'clock. Right, no one wants to be out there, so we close it off and we can do some projects out there later in the evening if we need to. So if you're a member, if you have a membership at the garden, you actually can get in an hour earlier at 8 o'clock, which is nice. Get a little bit in a little bit earlier, get to avoid a little bit of that heat and that sun, so it's a nice perk. And then on Wednesdays, we're open until 8 p.m. We just have a few left for that. It's called our Sunset Wednesday program. So you don't have to be a member to attend. You can just come as a regular guest, and you can enjoy the sunset and get some drinks or some food from the cafe. It'll be open until that time. It's a nice evening activity to do. So our website, it's the last one. Our website is naplesgarden.org if you want any more information about the things that are listed. All right, so we'll be going right into what is a botanical garden. So this quote here is from Botanic Garden Conservation International, which is a organization that most botanical gardens in the world are a part of, and it kind of sets the definition and helps organize botanical gardens and their efforts to collaborate. So they say botanical gardens are institutes holding documented collections of living plants for the purpose of scientific research, conservation, display, and education. And the key point of that definition is actually the documented collections point. So that's what really separates us from like a public park, right? So if you think of like a museum, right? Their collections are curated, and it's all very deliberate and intentional, and all of our plants are curated, and they're all deliberate and intentional as well. So if you're ever walking through the garden and you're looking at the base of some plants and you see like these little tags, you may have seen them, like little green tags or little red tags. They are accession tags. So we have a accessions team in our horticulture department, and each tag has like a barcode and it has other information written on it, and it all leads into a database that we have where all of our plants are listed. And it has like the history of those plants, where they came from, where if they purchased them from a certain supplier, or if they got them from a certain location, or how old that plant is, when it was acquired, where it's native to, different facts about it, growing techniques about it. They have a whole bunch of information about each plant, right? So that's, if you go to a public park, you're not gonna have that, right? The Parks and Rec Department doesn't run a collection organization of all of their plants, right? So that's what really separates us from those areas. Which is not to say that display isn't important, because it really is, right? are proud of all of our plants that we have, and we want to show them off. And a lot of them are rare and endangered, and we especially want to show those off, right? We want guests to see them and appreciate them and learn about them. And I like this picture because it's a picture of bananas, of course, right? So food plants are my favorite plants to talk about personally because everybody can identify with food plants. Right, so if you come up to a banana and you ask, what is this? And they say, oh, I've never seen that growing on a plant before. I don't even know what the banana plant looks like, what the banana tree looks like. Or if you show someone a pineapple, they say, oh, I didn't know pineapples grow in the ground, which they do. They don't, some people think they grow on a tree or on a vine. So it's a great way to instantly engage with guests, which is, food plants are my favorite ways to do that. Anybody recognize this location in the garden? This is the Orchid Garden, right, which is one of my favorite areas to go into. So being a garden down in Naples, we are a tropical garden, so all of our plants are tropical plants, and they're all outside all year round, which other places in the United States, other places in the United States may not have that. So if you go to other places, further north, they can't have those plants outside all year because you would get the snow and they would die, right? But because we're a tropical area, we get to have this beautiful orchid garden all year, and it's displaying thousands of orchids. We have thousands of individual orchids across hundreds of species shown throughout the garden. You'll see them strung up on trees and zip tied on and stuck in branches and in boots of palms. All throughout the garden, but especially in our orchid garden, it's like it's just totally chock full of orchids. It's quite a beautiful place to go to. All right, so kind of our main larger gardens that we have are a Brazilian garden, Caribbean garden, Southeast Asian garden, and a Florida garden. We have a lot of, those are the larger areas, but we have a lot of smaller gardens like the Orchid Garden and the Idea Garden, the Enabling Garden. There's a lot of smaller areas, so there's a lot of nooks and crannies to explore and see these different plants. All right, and there's also some new construction happening. Right, if you've been to the garden semi-recently, you may have seen where they're going to build this. So this is the new Horticulture Campus. All right, so it's next to Bayshore Drive, which is the road at the bottom part of the image. Right, so that's Bayshore. It's parallel to Bayshore. So the closest to me, those concrete slats that have individual slats separating different materials, that's our recycling center. That is built right now. That's where we make our mulch out in the garden. And then you can see it going away from it. They're going to be building 3 greenhouses, a small indoor potting area, a shade house, an office building, an operations building, and a sun nursery. It's a lot of stuff happening back on this side of the property. So it's about $15 million for this project to build it. They're going to be starting construction on it soon. And it will allow us to expand our areas because we have 2 future areas for future garden developments. So you want to expand 2 more major gardens in the future. But right now, our internal horticulture space is very limited, is very small, and we don't really have the capacity to expand. So that's really what this is for, and also to do some more conservation projects in the future. Yeah, so speaking of conservation, it's our newest department. When I started 3 years ago, there was 2 people in that department, and now there's like 9, I think. So they've been really expanding, and that's been really our focus in the last few years. This is a picture of Jessica here, and she's collecting seeds out in our natural areas. She's collected hundreds of seeds of native plants, some of them endangered, out in our natural areas, and she's been storing those seeds in a large freezer, a large chest freezer, and then they filled that up and they bought a big walk-in freezer. And they've been putting seeds in there to store for long term. And then she's also been growing up some of those seeds and writing documentation on how to grow these plants and how to cultivate them by hand. As a lot of these native Florida plants that she's collecting from, if you were to Google like how do I grow like this plant, you write the name in, there would be nothing that shows up. There is no documentation. No one has really grown these plants before. No one really knows the strategies or how to do it. So she is by trial and error, experimenting with and growing these plants and then writing up the step-by-step, the how-to on how to care for them and propagate them. It's important because we have a lot of endangered species here in Florida, right? So if we want to protect those plants and save them for the future, we need to get started now while they're still out in the wild. They're still able to be found. So there's been a lot of work done in the natural areas. Other than just the collecting of the plant material, there's been a lot of restoration work. This is the birding tower. If you've been to the garden, if you've been up there, it doesn't look like this now. I'm going to show you what it looks like in a second. But when they first bought the property, it was the wetlands area to the south of the garden. It was covered in this tree that you're seeing. It's called Australian Melaleuca. It was dropped by the forestry department in like the 40s and 50s. And what it does is that it absorbs water into its roots and into its trunks, and it dries out the wetlands, and it makes it easier to build. So that's why they originally dropped it, but it seeds out about 4 times a year, which is a lot of times to seed out. So it's spread itself, and now it's a major problem in the Everglades. They're having to remove it now because it's drying out the Everglades and drying out those wetlands. You can see how prolific it grows. I mean, you cannot see through this area. When I show you the next image, you'll be amazed at the view that you'll be able to see once they removed it. But they had to come through with chainsaws and remove every single tree out of this area to restore it. If you look at the bottom part of the image, it's a little muddy at the ground level, right? So that tree absorbing that water really does reduce it, reduce the water level down into the ground. But then when they cut it, this is what it looks like now. So this area here is total wetland. If you were to stand at the burning tower and look right, it's kind of off the image. But you can kind of see it towards the back. But if you were to stand at the burning tower and look right, you would just see open water, right, in that area. So once they went in and removed that, it took a multi-year effort to remove that Melaleuca. The water came back, and then we had a lot of plant and animal species come back as well. So we do a birding group on Tuesdays, usually volunteer-led birding group. And that first image, when they did a bird count out there Christmas Day back in the early 2000s, they did a bird count. They only saw about 14 birds in that first image with all of the trees. And it's an invasive non-native species, so the native bird species, they see those foreign trees and they think, oh, I don't know what that tree is. Why would I go in there? It's not where I make my nest. It's not where I get my food. I don't recognize it. I don't want to go into it, so they abandon those areas. And then once they removed it, we typically see about 50 to 60 species out here, not even like birds. Remember, they saw 14 individual birds before, and now we see 40 to 50 species of birds out in these wetland areas. That's really a good testament of how, when removing these invasive species and restoring the land to its natural state, you get a lot of that wildlife that wants to come back. All right, so this image here, all the areas highlighted in red are what are called biodiversity hotspots. And there are regions throughout the world that have a high level of animal and plant and insect and bird diversity. There's a lot of different species all together, all in a small area. So these areas here, if you look to where we are down at the tip of Florida, we're right next to what's called the Caribbean hotspot, and then the Mesoamerica, which is through Mexico and into Central America, those hotspots there. Right, so these areas cover just over 2% of the Earth's land surface, but hold 44% of the world's plant species are found in these areas. So there's a real high concentration of plant and animal species in these red areas here. But all of the red areas have lost over 70% of their natural vegetation in these areas. So these areas highlighted in red are really the endangered spots of the world that are in risk of losing They're plants and animals, so that's what our main focus has been at our garden. We've been focusing on the Caribbean region. And this is just a few different organizations throughout the Caribbean that we've partnered with and worked with. And they just recently, last summer, I believe, got back from a trip in Puerto Rico. And so they went to Puerto Rico and they were collecting cactus species. And they collected every cactus species found on Puerto Rico. Every single species. They took cuttings and seeds and they collected plant material from every single species. And the Puerto Rican cacti, they are being threatened by a bug, a beetle, that's getting into the cacti and it's eating through them and it's just decimating their population, just totally wiping them out. So us going over there and helping them, we partnered with some organizations over there. We helped to collect and preserve that plant species and we brought it back to our facilities and now we're growing it up currently in our facilities so that there will be a backup of that material so that if it disappears, which it's looking like it might, that it won't be lost forever. And it'll still be available to us, and then we'll grow it up and propagate it and make more, and then we'll spread it and give it to other gardens and organizations so that there could be even more backups, right? So that's most of our work abroad is focused on the Caribbean and south of us. We're actually closer to Cuba, physically closer to Cuba and Naples than we are to Jacksonville, right? And actually our climate matches the Caribbean region more closely than it does to the Panhandle and Jacksonville, right? So we have a lot of overlap in terms of plant species and animal species and birds, right? So a lot of if you go out into South Florida, wild areas, a lot of the things that you're going to see, you're also going to see in the Caribbean on these different islands. That's where a lot of our focus has been turned is towards the south. But we also do work locally. So this was, I can't remember when the date was. I think this, sorry, 2021 right there. 2021, so this is Chad, he's our Director of Conservation here, and they were working on a beach access project in 2021 in Naples, so like by Naples Pier and like 3rd Avenue access. If you've ever been down there to those beach access points, a lot of the dunes were starting to erode away and getting covered in other invasive species. So what they did is they went in and they removed a lot of invasive plant species from these dunes, and then they planted native Florida scrub species, which the scrub habitat is those kind of dune habitats that you find by beach areas. And they planted them in 2021 through many different access points all along Naples beach, and then they came back just a few weeks ago and they looked, and their native species that they had planted had completely grown and covered, and they couldn't even find the original spots that they had originally planted. That's how prolific their growth was, is that those native species had grown so quickly and so abundantly that they didn't even know where they had originally stuck them in the ground. We've been working with the county and city level people and state level people to recommend plants into different parks and dune areas and beach areas and different natural areas and city areas to help them out when they're wanting to make these areas look beautiful for citizens and people to appreciate, but also to be natural and to be healthy for the environment. Right? Because plants are very important. Right? All life on Earth depends on plants, of course. Right? But if you lose one plant species, so it's estimated that losing one plant species can have a cascading effect, and you lose 30 other plant and animal species. Right? So plants are kind of underrepresented in terms of federal funding. So plants make up 57% of the federal endangered species list in the United States. Does anybody want to guess what percentage of funding they receive? 4%. That's it. They make up 57% of the endangered species list, and they might receive 4% of funding. Right? So, admittedly, plants aren't as attractive as animals. If you put a picture of a a cat on a poster, it usually gets more attention than a picture of a leaf. But if you don't save that plant, then you won't save that endangered animal either, right? So we've been really pushing at the garden here, pushing plants, of course, onto the public consciousness and helping people to know about them and appreciate them. So that comes in for me, for my department. So I'm in the education department here, of course. So our mission is that blurb right there. We want to be a global leader in environmental education for all ages and audiences. Right? So this is a picture of our director of education, Britt, and she's leading what's called the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. So you may have heard of blue-green algae before, or red tide, right? Yeah, it's a pretty big problem down here in Florida, and we have during different parts of the year. We'll get swells of it, and then you can't go to our beaches or into the lakes or different areas, right? And that has a negative impact on both the environment, but also on our tourism industry, right? Because our beaches are a big pull for that, and if people can't go to the beach, then that really hurts us down here in South Florida, right? So it's just a group of city managers, county managers, landscape developers, environmental engineers, and concerned citizens and others, and they all came to the garden, and Britt gave them a tour of our stormwater management system. We have a pretty robust system at the garden, is that we have different natural areas, and we pump water, reclaimed water through those different areas, and those plants help to remove pollutants and extra nutrients before they get put into our lake system. So we were showing them that system and how it works and how it's set up, and educating them about it, and then they can go out into their respective areas and make informed decisions to help curb the blue-green algae problem. Right, so we use a robust set of skills. Really the two top ones there are the most important ones, I think. It's applied science skills. We use basic scientific knowledge to solve real-life practical problems out in the world, right? Those blue-green algae, red tide problems. And we use, with our regional knowledge of Southwest Florida and their ecosystems and our plants, to recommend plant species to go into different areas. You know, a city manager may come to us and say, hey, we have an area that we're going to plant out. What plants would you recommend? And we think long and hard about what plants you think may work there, and their growing requirements, and the seasons, and how much water they're going to get before we dive in. So we try to be practical in our solutions and helpful, and give them sound advice. But we also do daily programs every day, public programs just for visitors and people coming to the garden. This is a quick list of things that we do on a semi-regular basis. We have some things that we do on a daily basis, and some things that happen when the need arises. This is not comprehensive either. There's actually some things not on here that we still do. But we have daily tours. We have about 6 tours a day during heavy season, right? So those are just guests coming to the garden, and they sign up, say, hey, I want to go on a walking tour, on a daily tour. And we sign them up, and they come along and they learn about the garden and different plants. We have field trips. School groups come and they do different projects. They may do activities or worksheets or different things in the garden. They may do one of the popular field trips that we do is called Dirt Made My Lunch, and it's all about edible plants and edible food. Yeah, and then they get to plant a seedling, usually like a vegetable seedling, like a tomato or a collard green or something, and then they get to take it home with them and continue to grow it and continue that learning experience. We have a kids program happening every day called our Wonder program, it's a little activity table. We have adult walk-up program called Dig Deeper, which has a different topic each day that people can learn about. And we have audio tours. If you don't want to follow a guide around, you can do our audio tours on your phone. You go to a website and you're able to listen on different topics, on different signs spread throughout the garden, a whole bunch of different things that happen each day that you're able to do. All right, so I'm going to talk about just what's going on, a couple of things that are happening in the garden for the next few weeks, next few months. So anybody seen this stickwork sculpture? Oh, yeah, one person, yeah. So this is pretty new. This was built in November. So if you haven't visited since November, I want to encourage you to visit because you'll be able to see it. So this is our newest outdoor sculpture exhibit. It's called Stickwork. The title of the piece itself is called Sea Change. It's in the Caribbean Garden. Right? It's on the main lawn next to the pergola that had all those pretty blue flowers growing over them. The artist was Patrick Doherty, and he was here in November with his son Sam Doherty. 4 or 5 volunteers a day for 17 days to build. So it came up pretty quick. It's about 70 feet long, the sculpture itself, made out of willow saplings. So about 30,000 pounds of willow saplings all woven together to create this piece. So it's a semi-permanent sculpture. We think it'll last maybe 2 or 3 years, so you got time to come visit it. Right? But it will eventually break down and deteriorate because it's just sticks, right? So it's eventually going to fall apart and they'll remove it after that point. But until then, it's just out in the Caribbean Garden to come appreciate. This is our Sunset Wednesday exhibit. I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but at the very beginning. So we're open until 8 o'clock on Wednesdays. We have one of our last ones coming up in next Wednesday. So just a few more left, but you can still come even if you're not a member. Music in the Garden. We have second Saturday every month. There is music in the garden. So the last one is in June. All right, so we have like 2 more left. But they play different bands on the performance lawn, on the water garden stage. The band sets up, and then you're able to bring a chair, bring a lawn chair or beach chair, and sit on the performance lawn and listen to the bands. Different bands every time, usually kind of like a folk music or a rock band. A lot of people come, pretty popular, so if you do, I would recommend getting there early so you get a good spot in the shade. It starts at 2 o'clock each Saturday, so each session, the band starts playing at 2, and they usually play till 4. So I would get there maybe 1 o'clock or 12:30. You want to get a really good spot. All right, and then our newest indoor exhibit is the Woven Fiber Arts exhibit. So this is the indoor exhibit hall, the Captain Hall. It's in between the gift shop and the cafe. It's really the only indoor section of the garden that you're really going to visit in. All the rest of the garden areas, all the plants are all outside, right? But there's 5 local artists who have created different pieces out of natural fibers, different woven pieces. We had some quilts, and there's some baskets woven together, different things to come see. So that'll be going until June, so I encourage you to come check that out. It kind of ties in with the stickwork sculpture as well, as that's also woven out of natural pieces and natural material. So I would encourage you to come visit both stickwork and the woven indoor world. All right, so this is a virtual event that we're putting on. So this is about our 3rd year that we've done this, called Project Stay Planted, where we use the app called iNaturalist, which is an app where you're able to scan, take a photo with your camera, with your phone, and then upload it into the app, and it helps scientists track populations of native plants out in the wild. So we do an event every year from Earth Day to Memorial Day, where we have a little contest going where different users can upload pictures of plants that they find out and around South Florida, in their yard, at the park, different areas, and we run that online until Memorial Day, and you may receive a prize at the end if you put the most things in. All right. Any questions for me? Yep.
Do you still have the child's garden?
Yes, the children's garden. So the children's garden is still closed. Yeah, it's been closed for a while. So they originally closed it over COVID, for COVID concerns, of course, right? But it's been closed since we reopened because they want to renovate it. So they want to renovate the children's garden, update it, make it look nicer and better. But they can't do that quite yet because they're still working on the Horticulture Campus. So that's the main focus right now, is that large campus facility. So I don't have any news or updates on when the children's garden will reopen or be focused on, but not until the Horticulture Campus is built at least. So I wouldn't expect any updates until the Horticulture Campus is done. So yes, unfortunately, we don't still have it. Anyone else? Way in the back.
Is the butterfly house still there?
Yeah, the butterfly house was in the children's garden. Yeah, so it's still inaccessible. The butterfly house, it's currently taken down, so it's kind of a separate thing in that our supplier for the butterfly chrysalids, we used to get chrysalids in the mail, native butterfly species. The supplier for that sold his business, like before COVID. So that was closed down even right before COVID. We were thinking about closing that down, so yeah, currently inaccessible. But there's if you go out to the Florida garden, they have a lot of native wildflowers out there. It's like the best place to see butterflies in the garden if you wanted to see them out in the wild, just flying around. Anyone else? All right. I want to thank you guys for coming to my